Thank you very much indeed, Dan. Good morning, everybody. Lovely to see so many friends here in the audience and hopefully new friends to come. I have an unenviable task today because Dan asked me to talk to you a little bit about transferring the information, let me be careful with my words, that we collect into data. And as a working scientist, I have some fairly strong views on this, so hopefully I don't offend anyone in the talk. So in terms of where all of this came from, I'm delighted to see my good friend Mike Short here in the background. This madness all started in 1998 when Mike rang me, said he was going to run these angling courses and could I add to them in terms of talking a little bit about entomology. And that led on then to working with University College Dublin, running adult lifelong learning courses in the context of teaching people about their rivers and their lochs. I worked part-time for the Atlantic Salmon Trust, and we were very lucky to get some money together, and we were able to put this in a much more concrete way, able to put it together in the context of a new system that we devised, which was quantitative, and that's really the core of what we want to talk about today. This was the small streams characterization system. So we get a quantitative output, which from a data point of view is really important. The next steps then was really to try and roll this out through my own consultancy. And as I rolled this out, I learned an awful lot, particularly in the context of a marine program, would you believe, that was willing to fund me in the context of small coastal streams, where I dealt with a lot of farmers and I dealt with forestry people as well, seeing how they interacted and what sort of information was available, what they could collect, what they were interested in collecting, and most importantly, what were they interested in training as such. I then worked very closely with Catchment Care here, which was a fantastic programme, and also with Law Pro, as you've seen earlier from Vicky. But in reality, in terms of moving the process forward then, we needed to start looking at bigger programmes and seeing how we might do this. And I got an opportunity then over the past year to look at the mayfly, Ephemera danica. And this was done in the context of working obviously with local volunteers. And the summary of the results of what we found is available on YouTube. But the volunteers that we had were able to come up with some quite extraordinary findings, particularly in relation to flora. And flora is really, I think, it's the very poor cousin of what we talk about. And we managed to find some really quite dramatic changes in terms of the spread of natural flora in the big lochs. Most importantly, with the spread of the flora, we also saw very major changes in terms of the habitat type, in terms of the sediments that were under the flora. And we saw a situation where the big mayfly was being excluded because the actual habitat used by the mayfly was no longer available to it. We also saw the ability of the mayfly to be able to colonise new and very novel materials. We saw them colonise small peat particles that were calcified. But most impressive, and I first noticed this in Lusty Beg Island just down the road from us here, the fact that they really like empty zebra mussel shells. So these are a really important new habitat for the mayfly. So there's lots of things happening in these loch systems that we really don't appreciate and we don't understand. So what can we do then to try and put this together? So in terms of this word science, citizen science, what we're trying to do is to get ourselves recognised by the authorities who are running, let's call it, real science programmes. So what I think is really important, and this is not to degrade in any way the observational material that people may collect, but if we want to be taken seriously in terms of collecting data, I think we have to actually focus on numerical results. It has to be quantitative. We have to do it in the context of certified courses, I would suggest. We have to adopt systems that actually quantify the results. It needs to be possible to compare statistically what the approach you're taking with the professional approaches, I think, that are out there. We need, as we saw earlier from Vicky, we need that quality control element, and we need the ability to be able to store and disseminate the information. That's a really important point. So in the Mayfly programme, as you've seen from Vicky, we stole some of this from her particular programme. But what we're looking at as phase 2 is where we're actually going to be collecting data on water temperature, collecting data on light intensity, because we think light intensity is actually very important from the flora point of view. We're going to be looking, as you saw earlier, at water clarity. We're going to be looking then at a quantitative method to look at the actual emergence of some of these insects. can we come up with a statistically reliable method, a stratified sampling method, whereby we can actually look at the skins of the mayflies, or indeed the skins of chironomids. And we're also looking at measuring the nymphs and getting linked frequency distributions and helping out in the flora and the sediment. So as you can see, what we're trying to do here is to pull together the actual quantitative material. And just to end, if I may, Dan, on one note, I started to work in 1975. My very first meeting was in Trad Point. The reason we were in Trad Point in 1975 was because Lough Erne was polluted. Can you just imagine the amount of phosphorus that's locked into Lough Erne at the moment in all of that calcium? John mentioned earlier 2 decades. Good luck, John. I think it's actually going to be a lot longer than that. These lake systems are extraordinarily complex, and we mess with them at our peril. Thank you very much.